Hi guys, this is Vidas.
And Ausra.
Let's start now episode 24 of Ask Vidas and Ausra podcast. And today's question was sent by Ugo Chukwu, and he asks about the registration, how to make appropriate registrations for different kinds of pieces. Well, Ausra, is it a narrow or a broad question?
This is a very broad question.
Yes, we could write a dissertation about that, and it even would only scratch a surface, right?
Yes, more than one actually. You could write many doctoral dissertations on this subject.
You could write one dissertation for registering, let's say, chorale preludes, another for registering free pieces, for registering, let's say, French organ music.
Sure, Italian, German, and it also depends on which century the music was, created.
Okay, but still we need to give some advice
Sure.
how to start thinking about the registration if you don't know anything, right? Let's say let's pretend that the person doesn't know anything, and he or she is positioned at the organ bench for the first time, and right, and they need to learn something, right? To play something, maybe for church service. Um, Imagine yourself in this situation. What would you do for starters? What's the basic principle of organ registration for you?
Well, if it's a familiar organ and I don't know what to do, I would just use the principal 8-foot.
That's
At the beginning, yes.
the most basic organ stop, and usually you can see this in the facade, and you can hear it very clearly, um, and and it fits well for a lot of organ music, a lot of kinds of organ music, a lot of types of organ music compositions, right? Even for let's say a fugue, you could play a fugue, entire fugue, or fuguette, or chorale prelude, just on one principle.
And of course, you could add, if you need a louder sound, you could add different principles like 8, 4, and 2 foot. You would get pretty big sound already.
Yes.
And when in the pedal, I would say you would use like, if it's louder registration, use 16-foot principle and 8-foot principle and maybe 4-foot principle. This would be loud enough. If you need a softer registration, then just take flutes. Take 16 and 8-foot flutes in the pedal and the same do in the hands, only an octave higher, so it would be 8-foot flute and 4-foot flute.
Usually we need to have 16 foot in the pedals,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Unless
It's indicated in the score. So when you are taking a piece of music, always look at the suggestions, because especially modern composers, they always add what kind of registration they expect you to play. So always look at that, and then of course you have every time to adjust to particular organ, because the composer might imagine one stop, but your organ might not have it. So you have to adjust somehow.
exactly.
So sometimes you have to do tricks, like for example to take only 4-foot flute, for example, and to play it an octave lower, or do things like this.
Yes. Another principle is of course to remember that in earlier days, before 18th century, 16 foot in the pedal was not always a norm, not always the required thing, right?
Yes.
Not always. If you play a chorale prelude or chorale fantasia in a certain episode, you have a chorale tune in the pedals.
Then you would have to play it, on the higher
On the
pitch.
Then you need to think about the range. If it's a bass range, then 16 foot like posaune would sound well.
Sure.
But if it's a tenor range, then of course 8-foot trumpet would be appropriate, not 16, right? And sometimes composers wrote choral preludes where organist would play the tune with the pedals, even though it was written in the alto or the soprano
Sure.
ranges, right? So you need then to have 4 foot reed like that, or even 2 foot cornea, something zinc, I think they call it, or other in very short resonator and high pitched stop in the pedals at 2 pitch level.
And of course, there are, also stops that you cannot use alone
Mm-hmm.
without other stops. For example, you could not use mixture
Mm-hmm.
alone without other stops, or you could not use like Unda Maris. Yes.
Mixture, you see, for avant-garde music lends well, right?
Yes.
If you are composing a piece which is very weird and you know has modern sounds, then solo mixture or cymbal or sharp sometimes might be very appropriate
Yes,
just for effect.
but not for a common period music.
Right, exactly. Um, what else can we suggest for starters? Um, Never change the registration too often.
Sure.
That's one of the common mistakes people make. You have to look at the texture of the music, right, and see if one episode is entirely in one color, entirely in one character, then you don't need to change that
Yes.
during that within the episode. Then when something new comes into the piece, then you can change something, right? How do you decide when to play on one manual and when to play on 2 manuals?
It depends on the structure of the composition.
For example, if it's not written in the score, you probably look at the solo line, right? And if that solo line can be played with one hand, and out other couple voices can be like accompaniment, right? Not as important. Then you could play the solo line on the separate solo
Sure.
stop.
Sure. Yes.
hmm Like reed, mutation combinations, flute combinations, right?
Yes, and if you are like a beginner organist and you're playing, let's say, a church, yes, and you have like a few combination sets, so just program them in advance and do, let's say, number one the loudest registration, and then softer, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That way you will get you can change registration pretty easily during service.
And a lot of organs have presets, right? But
Sure.
they not necessarily are very well constructed. You have to check them if they suit your style and taste.
Well, always listen to what you are doing. I think your ears are the best helper.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and always simplify, simplify, simplify. At least for starters, right?
If you don't know how to use a particular stop, just don't use it
Mm-hmm.
until you will find out what it is and if it is suitable or not.
Exactly. So I think for starters, people can experiment with various sorts of registrations, right, in their pieces, in their music. And please send us your questions, right?
Sure.
We would love to help you grow as an organist, and the best way to contact us is through email when you subscribe to our blog at organduo.lt. You can respond to any of our messages, and therefore we could help you grow. Thanks, guys. This was Vidas.
And Ausra,
And remember, when you practice,
miracles happen.